Whether it's a movie night or just midday, Skinny Pop is a salty snack that keeps on giving. Made with just 3 simple ingredients for an irresistibly delicious taste and a large serving size that lasts. Deliciously popped, perfectly salted. Skinny Pop, popular for a reason. Shop Skinny Pop now.
I'm Jennifer Garner. You may know me from my other job, but I'm a business owner too. Here at Once Upon a Farm, we chose the Capital One Venture X business card because it makes everything we do even more rewarding. With no preset spending limit, our purchasing power adapts to meet our business needs. And unlimited double miles on every purchase means we earn more too. And when we travel, we get access to over 1,300 airport lounges. The Capital One Venture X business card. What's in your wallet?
Terms and conditions apply. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/VentureXBusiness.
Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can I make my side softer?
Can I make my side firmer?
Can we sleep cooler?
Sleep Number does that. Cools up to 8 times faster and lets you choose your ideal comfort on either side. Your Sleep Number setting. And now save 50% on the new Sleep Number limited edition smart bed. Limited time. Exclusively at a Sleep Number store near you. Learn more at sleepnumber.com.
Hello and welcome to the Ground Jewels. My name is James Dixon and I'm delighted that you've joined me this week to discuss special sporting places, and we have an absolutely fantastic guest. We have Orla Chennaoui. She is going to be talking about Croke Park, a magnificent GAA stadium in Dublin, loads of history, social history, political history, personal history there from Orla as well. It is a brilliant interview. We cover everything from 1920 to the present day. We talk about her experience going there to support Derry in All-Ireland football. We talk about that famous England-Ireland moment in 2008 when non-Gaelic games were allowed to be played in Croke Park for the first time. It really is a special stadium and a really fantastic episode, and I'm delighted we've got someone of Orla's calibre to join the show. We'll normally start and just keep going really positive because it's a super positive episode. However, because we've got Orla on today and because I'm so disappointed with something that I saw online yesterday, I've re-recorded this intro. And this is not the first time that this has happened. I felt really bad for Orla yesterday because she felt like she had to call out people, and let's be honest about this, men, it's not people, and let's not even call them men, let's call them boys because that is what they are, who feel the need to denigrate female sports broadcasters for being female, as if they shouldn't be allowed to enjoy sport and certainly not commentate on sport or work in it in a professional way. And this isn't just Orla. I'm Kate Mason, who one of our best episodes ever, Kate was. And she felt the need a few months ago, to do the same. And I'm sure for every person who has the sort of power and status within the industry to call it out, there's 10, 20 more who wish they could call it out. And just stop it, right? Just stop it. If you don't think women can be involved in sport, just, in fact, stop this show. Just, we don't want you. We don't want you part of this community. If you're not in, if that's you, find somebody else. This is. I just can't. It just baffles me. People who say they don't like women's sport. Well, you don't like 50% of sport, right? So, are you a sports fan, right? You know, that's what I'm. You're not. If you don't. So that's what I would just say to that. If you don't like women's sport, you don't like 50% of sport. Right? The Olympics, they're 50-50 for a reason. I don't like women's sport because it's new, it's woke. I've liked women's sport since I was a kid. When I was younger, I was watching Steffi Graf, Martina Navratilova, Arantxa Sanchez Vicario, Sally Gunnell in the Athletics, Merlin Ottey. God, I loved Merlin Ottey. I thought she was so bloody brilliant. So if you're one of those people who thinks, you know, behind an anonymous social media avatar or whatever, it's okay to just denigrate people just trying to do their job, go away, shut up and go away, but certainly go away from here. not interested in having you as part of this community. And if you think that's don't give a crap, just go, right? This episode is completely positive. Well, it's brilliant. And actually, this episode is brilliant. Is it completely positive? No. We have to have a difficult discussion about what happened in Ireland in 1920 and some of the lingering stuff from that. So that's a quite nuanced discussion. It's not universally positive, but yeah, it's an important discussion to have. So this episode is brilliant. It's about a fantastic, important stadium, Croke Park. And I cannot stress this enough. It is with a superb broadcaster who knows her stuff inside out. And the idea that people who don't also, we don't even mention this in the episode. She's a proper athlete. She was a triple jumper. Orla is a proper athlete. Has a love of sport since childhood. Did incredibly well in Ireland as a triple jumper. She works on rugby, on cycling, on the Olympics. Multilingual. Even if you have this mind, pick your target because she's just anyway. Calm down, James. Let's enjoy it because this is a fantastic stadium, fantastic city, and as I've stressed so much in this intro, a fantastic guest. So let's get to our interview with Orla. So today on the Ground Jewels, we are joined by the broadcaster Orla Chennaoui. Orla is a fantastic broadcaster. You'll know her from cycling coverage, from rugby coverage, and of course the fantastic job that she did on the Paris Olympics last year. But we're not going to talk about anything related to that, or we might, but we're primarily going to talk about Croke Park, home of the Gaelic Athletic Association and Europe's biggest non-football stadium. Orla, welcome to the Ground Jewels.
Thank you very much, James. Love that introduction. It's lovely to be here with you.
Thank you. So I got in touch with you to pull back the curtain a little bit after I think an article that I saw you write in the Metro, or it might not be the Metro, but an article that you'd written.
I do write in the Metro, so that would make sense.
So you were talking about how much you enjoyed working a game at the Aviva, working with Irish rugby, and talking about the importance of it being an all-Ireland sport. And I said, would you like to talk about Lansdowne Road? And you said, no, but I'll talk about Croke Park, which is fine. So why is Croke Park your ground jewel?
Oh, it's such a big question, actually. It speaks to my childhood. It speaks to my upbringing, my introduction to love of sport. It speaks to my community. It speaks to my national identity. It represents so much to me. And when you ask me, it's really interesting, actually, that the outside perception would be, and I guess the relevance to rugby, the perception might be that Lansdowne Road is our national stadium, and it is for soccer fans. And we do call it, where I'm from, we've always called it soccer because football is something else, which is what we'll get to. And I'm a huge football fan, a soccer fan in that sense. But for me, our spiritual home is Croke Park, and it always has been. And I say that we call it soccer because where I'm from, I'm Northern Irish, and I grew up in a very Irish community within Northern Ireland. So I grew up in the height of the Troubles, really, where everything was divided along quasi-religious lines. That was the very general term we'll give to it. But I was brought up Irish, really. Irish Catholic. And so for us, certainly in my little community, it was all about Gaelic football. If you're Irish, depending on the strength of your club, whether you're a Gaelic football community or a hurling community or indeed camogie, but for us it was all about football. So I grew up with a deep, deep love of football that came primarily from my mum, really, but my dad as well, but my mum is obsessed. And so Croke Park was our spiritual home, and it is the home of so many wonderful memories and family trips, and the beginning really of my love affair with sport.
Oh, it's lovely. So you're growing up in the north of Ireland. You're growing up in Derry. Is it? I think it's fair to say that Derry is not the strongest traditional county in terms of football. Is that fair?
Oh, now we're getting into it early doors, James.
I'm guessing since you deflected, that is fair.
well. Okay, yeah, continue with your question. Yeah.
When you're growing up, you have a great team, don't you? You're doing really well in the Ulster Championship, and 1993, you get to go to you make it to the All Ireland final, which is played at Croke Park.
Oh, yeah, and honestly, James, like this is a podcast, right? So people can't see the size of my smile, but this was a seismic moment in our community, in our county, in my parish, in my childhood, right? The 93 um All Ireland final is the most significant sporting moment in my world, certainly at that time. And so, yes, you're right. Derry were not certainly a football powerhouse, right? And never won the All Ireland. And so my parents had grown up with that, really. Now, I grew into a Derry that was emerging into being something really exciting. And I feel really lucky about this because whenever I was little, we would go to Derry games all the time. And so our Sundays were often packing the whole family up into the car. We would drive to wherever Derry were playing. We'd take a picnic with us and a flask. And we had this sort of Volvo estate car. And whenever we got to the ground or near the ground, you park anywhere you could find in the country roads around. And you'd see everyone from your parish and neighbouring parishes. And we would open the boot of the Volvo estate and use that as a table and a seat area, really. And we would unpack all the sandwiches that my mum had wrapped in tinfoil and the flask of tea, and we'd all have our little picnic before going to the game. Anyway, whenever we're traveling to a Derry game, my dad used to always say, fly those flags out the window on the way because you won't get to fly them on the way back home again. The understanding being you can get excited about Derry on the way there, but don't be disappointed because we're probably going to lose. And so that was the mindset that my parents brought into this, really. But for me, I was witnessing Derry doing really well. And so the year before, in 1992, we'd actually won the All Ireland League final, which isn't the big deal that the Sam Maguire is and the All Ireland final that we went on to win. But we were in Croke Park for that as well. And we'd beaten Tyrone in the league final. Now, if anyone is listening and knows anything about Gaelic football or Ireland, they will know that Derry and Tyrone, certainly back then when Derry were really good, we were bitter rivals. I mean, to this day, my mother really would struggle to support Tyrone, even if they're playing in an All-Ireland final. But we are bitter rivals. We play in the same colours as well, red and white, just inverted. And so we beat Tyrone in the All-Ireland League final in 1992, and that was huge. However, we still had this quest that we were on. That's a step along the way to try to win the All-Ireland final, which we'd never done before. But yeah, we made it all the way through, and then we made it into the final, and we're in Croke Park playing against Cork, and these men in the field were absolute heroes to me. You think of, like, I supported Liverpool as a kid. These players were just as big to me as those big Liverpool players. And yet one of them was my science teacher. You know, they were people who worked in the bank, you know, in the village just down the road. But yeah, we won the All Ireland final, and it was just, in my memory now, it feels like the pure distillation of joy, utter celebration. And back in those days anyway, you could run onto the pitch, you know, and you could be amongst all the players. And for us as a community, it was just a massive celebration. We had, I don't even think this was much of a thing back then elsewhere, but we had this open top bus tour, you know, with all of the players coming back that night. I remember they came to Mahara, and Mahara is like a little village near to where I'm from. And we all stayed up in Mahara until way past midnight so that the players could come back and celebrate. I don't think I'm misremembering that. Maybe they celebrated in Dublin first and came back the next night. But they proceeded on this tour of the county for the next few weeks where they would go on this open top bus tour. And I remember them coming to my village, Ballinascreen, Draperstown. And there was this big sort of cattle shed where we put a stage up, and the players all came onto this stage like rock stars, and we were all going mad for them. And I remember, like, this is before the age of selfies, I remember having like a book that I wanted all the players to sign, and I went up and I said, can I have your autograph? Can I have your autograph? And I went up to Mr. Downey, as I knew him to be, because he was my science teacher, and he said, I'm not giving you your an autograph, or I sign your science work every week. Just stop, go away, and sort of breaking that bubble for me. But yeah, Croke Park was the home of one of my very happiest foundational childhood memories.
That's amazing. I love that you're talking.
A long
No,
story, sorry, James, but there's a
there
lot
there
in
is a
that.
lot in that, and yeah, shame on Mr. Downey for not giving you an autograph when you asked for it.
I know. I think I've talked him
That's
into it in
that's
the
that,
end.
that's good. So what was so you've talked there about the sort of experience and what was the stadium like to sort of young impressionable eyes, because it's obviously historic, and we'll come on to the history. Do you remember where you were? 'Cause, you know, and was it the sort of imposing stadium that it still is today, or did it have a sort of different feel back in the early 90s?
Do you know, it's funny when we talk about imposing stadiums, because I think that's quite an adult concept, really. As a kid, my memory anyway was just excitement. It just felt massive. And we would, I would say 9 times out of 10, we would have tickets in the Hogan stand. So that was where I felt really at home. And for me, the whole experience was just huge, because I come from this tiny little rural village, and I was very it was a confusing time, I think, in terms of certainly your national identity, and sport both cleared the way and cleared a light on that, but also confused things, because I was Northern Irish, but I was Irish. And I remember um when we played in football and soccer, I remember at secondary school, Northern Ireland played the Republic of Ireland, and we were all Republic of Ireland fans. I remember saying to some of the kids at school, like, I'd love to see Northern Ireland do well. And they were really angry at me. How could you be supporting Northern Ireland? And I was like, well, we're Northern Irish people, you know. But there was so much sectarianism linked into all of that. But I say that because the solid identity I had at that time was being a Derry girl and being Irish. And so I remember going down to Croke Park, and the beauty of it was you would see, maybe there were little like stopping points along the way to Dublin that would become staging posts, really, for anyone coming down from the north. So we would often meet other families or people that we knew just by chance, grabbing breakfast, at a hotel along the way. And so you would see this convergence of red and white flags. We're red and white, on the way down to Dublin. But then you get into the city itself, and Dublin itself even was huge for us, and it was quite foreign in a way, because all the accents were different to us and it all seemed so cosmopolitan. But then you would see the other colors, of whatever team that you're playing. So you would see their flags and you would hear their voices, and you think, okay, this is next level. This is something quite a bit bigger. And then you get into the stadium itself, and it was just huge. And I don't remember anything intimidating about it. I remember it just being this really vocal and visual celebration, and to be in Croke Park meant that it was a massive occasion anyway. You'd made it, you were in the All-Ireland in some form, would be at the semi-finals, the finals, whatever. But to be playing in Croke Park was huge, and to be a supporter there, you felt like, on that day, you felt like, we're the ones that matter in Ireland today. Everybody's talking about us, everybody's talking about our county and our players. And so I just remember this incredible celebration. And even though it was huge, I think the beauty of Gaelic games in particular is, like I say, you would always be seeing people from your village or from the nearby village or the next school along. And it felt really parochial and family, and familiar and safe and comforting, but on a big stage. And it was that sort of mixture between the two, which I think is really, really special as a stadium. And it's not something I've experienced anywhere else, but maybe that's also because I've left childhood behind, and it was a different, and I've left Ireland behind to an extent. I mean, I don't live there is what I mean. I've never left it behind, but that mixture of the parochial and the grand stage is something that's incredibly, for me, unique about Crook Park.
Yeah, it's a lovely way to describe it. It's almost like, I guess, anxiety in itself is almost like an adult concept as well. In terms of when you're a child, you're like, you're just looking at you're looking at possibility.
Yeah, and you're not afraid of anything, and everything is there for the taking. And I go back to what my dad would say about, flying the flag on the way to the match because you won't fly it on the way back home again. We're just full of youthful, naive optimism. Every
Mm,
game can be won, and that's the beauty of childhood. You go into it thinking, well, your heart is then broken, obviously, when you do lose because you believed in it so fully. But it's that beautiful hope that we have in childhood that is very real. It's just as real as pessimism because one of them is going to come true,
mm.
but the realness of hope as a child is a beautiful thing, and that's probably what I still associate Croke Park with, is that hope and that optimism and that unity as well, which we'll get onto when we talk about other sports that have come into the venue. But yeah, for me it's a very rosy hinterland to look back onto.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Let's look at that history now, because I think it's hard to look forward to the sort of discussions that happened at sort of the end of the 2000s and how that stadium um, played a role. Played a role. Whether it played a role in changing Irish culture or was just a reflection of changing Irish culture, without talking about what happened, 105 years ago. So you're saying you're mostly in the Hogan stand. That's named after Michael Hogan. He's one of 14 people. He's a Tipperary player, and there's a massacre at that ground. And it's really important when we talk about grounds. It's because we're often in a celebratory mood. But I remember when talking about Ibrox with a previous guest. There are tragedies that happen at grounds as
Mhm.
well, and it's important not to be too flippant about that. But there's an event in 1920 where British forces entered Croke Park, shot into the crowd, killed 13 spectators, one player, which was in their mind sort of a retribution for a group of killings earlier, either in the day or and but so this is the original Bloody Sunday. So
Mhm.
so I know there's two Bloody Sundays that
Mhm.
sort of loom over your life, but this is the original one in 1920. And from that day, Croke Park takes on this really significant place in Irish nationalism and civic nationalism, doesn't it?
Mhm. Yeah, and national identity as well. I think sometimes even the word nationalism can be quite tainted, and
Mm,
but certainly in terms of our national identity, and it's something again that you don't really question as a kid, and you become much more aware of as you get older, and you're presented with different versions of history. For me, it was very obvious what had happened in Irish history because we were taught it from a very young age, and we're taught it in lots of different ways. I studied A-level history, and so we did revisionist history as well. So we're looking at it from different angles. And what I was really shocked by, and this is going off on a tangent, I apologize, but what I was really shocked by when I moved to England, I was, and shocked is the right word, shocked that Irish history, or I should say English history in Ireland, was not taught in any English school that I came across.
mm,
And I realized that this version that everybody in England, or the mainland as we call it, had of the Troubles in Irish history was completely skewed by cultural representations in movies or very biased news coverage for kids growing up. And there was no understanding whatsoever of where the whole Irish problem actually came from, which was, without letting blame on anybody's feet who's currently alive, but it was an English problem that was created because Ireland was an island, and I'm not going to get political. It sounds like I will. Um, as happens in colonialism across the world in lots of different countries. I live in the Netherlands right now. Another in inverted commas great colonial power, and so um the whole English Irish history in Ireland means something very different because we all are taught it at schools, and because we had to live with it. I had to live with it, and I grew up under the shadow of it, through no fault of my own, simply by dint of birth. Um, but yeah, so Croke Park, in an historic sense, was associated with the Irish War of Independence and the uh, heavy-handedness really of the British forces and everything that happened. But in a societal, in a cultural sense, for me and my community, it was sport. It was sport all the way through, and it was never ever really it existed in two different ways. Croke Park, it existed on the pages of the history books where we saw the pictures of what happened on that day and the entire context around that, and where that sat in Irish history, and it belonged in glorious technicolor in real life, which was the sporting representation. But then, which I think we're getting on to, we had the communion of the two, really, when Croke Park opened its doors to other sports. And, to be clear, Croke Park, the Gaelic Association the GAA had rules, very clear rules written down that Croke Park was not to be used for any rival games, so we do, you talk about nationalism. It was for nationalists, for Republicans. It could be seen very much as a symbol of everything that they were trying to protect, right? And the Irishness they're trying to protect. And part of that was not allowing the doors to be open to rugby or to soccer, for example. And so none of those sports were allowed to be played in Croke Park. Until Lansdowne Road was undergoing a refurbishment, and they rewrote the rules to allow for rival games. And by rival, it really meant foreign.
And they really mean English, because they're very happy to host NFL games at Croke Park. They go back to 1924. There's a rodeo that happens at Croke. It is English and British. But that debate, when it happened in Ireland, was incredibly interesting. But I just want to kind of confirm from the other perspective, it was the inadequacy of history teaching around the British Isles. I remember there was a programme 20 years ago. It was on the BBC to find the greatest Briton of all time. And there were various different nominations, and people got the top 10 basically had programs made about them. And one of the top 10 was Oliver Cromwell. And that caused a huge amount of problems, because Irish people said, hang on a minute, why Oliver Cromwell did that? And then there's a load of English people and British people going, I am literally hearing about this for the first time.
For the
And it's
first
just like,
time. Yeah,
so we all get taught, certainly my generation, we all get taught English Civil War, but we get a little bit of the Scottish role in the English Civil War, and then we conveniently sort of stop. As soon as Charles I's head comes off, it's just like, and then 11 years later, we're back to a monarchy. And it's just like, hang on, what happened there? and we don't get that kind of what happened in the interregnum. And there is I think all countries do it. They're selective about their history. But I just wanted to say, you are completely right that we it's inadequate what we learn about the British Isles. We learn far more about, I remember, we learn about the Romans and the Tudors, but not really our nearest neighbour. We don't really even learn enough about the French Revolution. It's very strange the way history's taught.
It is, and I'll keep this brief, but I think the problem is that in those gaps, hatred and resentment grow, and we think that we're doing it. And I say I'm assuming the powers that be think they're doing it to consolidate this feeling of greatness and hope and optimism, and the feeling that a nation might have done something good in the world. But actually, if you're then ignoring the uncomfortable truths, there is every chance that they are then replicated, because we can only learn from our mistakes, and we can only learn from mistakes if we know what those mistakes actually were. I think an acknowledgement of the totality of any country's past is not to bring shame on any current generation. It's an acknowledgement of what it's taken to form that country as it is, and from there greatness can come. But it can never come from a skewed version of how we ever got to this point. Self-awareness, self-knowledge is everything for individuals, for states. And I think that's where the problem lies. And it also, just very briefly to bring it back to sport again, it becomes really interesting, because whenever I talk to any of my English colleagues, which I obviously do a lot, I broadcast on UK TV, and they will ask questions as, in a World Cup, why is everybody against the English? Why are the Scots against the English? Why are the Irish against the English? And the point being that there isn't this full understanding of everything that's gone before, and sport is a great healer, but it is also a terrible sore picker. It keeps pushing at those sores and those open wounds. And if there is historical conflict that feels like it's being unacknowledged by one side, then it's, well, here's our chance to get it. Here's our chance to get that revenge. And most current English people don't know what the revenge is for. What are you doing? What's wrong with you? I think we just help that understanding.
Yeah, we like you. Stop being mean to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sport can be so useful to talk about history. I mean, even the fact that we play elite level sport as national teams is in itself a sort of political decision, and it comes about because nationalism was the strongest sort of identity when sport was when international sport was forming. So it's all really interesting, and I think one of those other interesting learning opportunities that we had as a nation, and certainly rugby fans in England had, was when the ban on rival games was relaxed and England got to play at Croke Park. And I know it wasn't the first game that it was at Croke, but there was a game against France. But I remember, and I've gone back and looked at the footage in preparation for this interview, but I think it was possibly the first time that there was like a public discourse in England about what had happened in 1920. And it's the anthems. I always go back to the anthems, and respecting national anthems is a sort of bugbear of mine. And there was a horrible group of sort of in the 90s, particularly England football fans. There was a group of them used to love to boo other people's national anthems, and I always go back to, so if 80,000 Irish people in Croke Park can stand there and immaculately observe God Save the Queen, anybody should be able to observe anybody else's national anthem. And I think the beauty of that day, obviously for you guys, it will be the result because you absolutely smashed us. That was it.
Yeah,
But
that was part of the beauty of it, but not the totality.
the way that I think it said so much about the grown up nature of the Irish nation there that maybe we even wouldn't have happened 10 years previously because of everything that had happened with the Good Friday Agreement, etc. But it's just one of those beautiful moments in sport where people were expecting some sport to shine some negativity, and actually sports fans rose above that and showed the sort of good in society.
Oh, it was so beautiful, James, and I love how you've described that as well. There was so much tied up in that day and where it came in history, as you say, a decade after the Good Friday Agreement, and the fact that we were, as a nation, in a place of healing, really, to be able to take that day on in the way that everyone did. But having rugby in Croke Park, for me, was massive because rugby, the reason I fell in love with rugby speaks to this confusion of national identity, really. And what I referenced earlier about the boys in my class in particular being really angry with me for supporting Northern Ireland. And I don't want to assume anyone has any historical knowledge or, cultural historical knowledge, but the Northern Ireland team was very much branded by sectarianism, and God Save the Queen, as it was then, was their national anthem. And so that was that was antagonistic to the Catholics, to the Irish, all the rest of it. And so football, soccer as a sport was divisive, in my head, even, never mind in the island, the country, whatever. But rugby was the saving grace of a sport. And again, I love that sport has the power to do this, because rugby was the one sport that we could play as an island, and that respected as well the fact that we had Northern Irish Protestants who were not only playing in the team but were superstars of the team, and who would ordinarily have stood for God Save the Queen. And so there was that sort of conflict between them, which is why we have Ireland's Call as a rugby anthem. And it's why I love that anthem so much. And again, that was written by Phil Coulter, who's a Derry man, and he wrote one of the most beautiful songs of my lifetime anyway, about the Troubles in Derry, and the town I loved so well. If you've never heard it before, it used to reduce me to tears regularly. But so my love of rugby came from that. It was like it was a resolution of this conflict of identity that I had. It just made sense to me. Oh, we can all cheer together, and we've got Northern Irish, and we've got, you know, people from the Republic of Ireland, and we've got Catholics, and we've got Protestants, and we're all just playing together. And so then to have that coming to Croke Park, even without the historical context, for me was wonderful. It was beautiful, right? And again, for English fans who've never studied Anglo-Irish history, they won't. I mean, they do get it. They do get it. They know there's this massive English-Irish rivalry, but it, for us, certainly for the Irish, it was always huge. So then to bring an England team into Croke Park, so the rival sport's fine, whatever. Most people didn't. I mean, I shouldn't say that so disrespectfully. A rugby fan, for example, wouldn't really be that bothered, or even a soccer fan wouldn't be that bothered about playing in Croke Park. Maybe soccer more so. But to have an England team, so as you say, we had France come already, and France beat us, and that was disappointing because we wanted to do well in the Six Nations, whatever. But England coming into that venue was huge, and I remember the tension in the country before that. I don't want to overplay that. I guess I'm very attuned to what the sporting conversation is, you know, and all of the columnists and all of the broadcasters are talking about this like it could go either way, you know. It could be disastrous, it could be full of violence, and the fans could erupt, and it could be a real touch point in some way. And there was this nervous anticipation that it would all go okay. And I felt like it was this healing of wounds in a way that sport can do that politicians can't, you know. And it baffles me sometimes that many politicians don't seem to really get the power of sport, unless they're trying to sell their nationhood, you know, with the London Olympics or whatever it might be. The power of sport goes way beyond anything that you can ever try to really achieve in politics. However, we got to that point because of the political process as well. But I felt like for us, it was a chance to try to put to bed what had happened in Croke Park, and also respect what had happened in Croke Park in 1920. And I was really nervous about God Save the Queen playing in the venue, because I was really hoping that we would be able to show that respect, and there would be dignity to the day. I think that was the key for me. But I remember I was working in London on the day. I worked for Sky News at the time, and I didn't get to go to the game. But I was following it as much as I possibly could. And this is actually quite a sad anecdote. I didn't know whether I was going to share this or not, but I've started now, so I might as well. We were watching it in the satellite truck in Sky News, so that's how I was able to watch it while I was still working. And I remember the anthems playing, and it was so beautiful. And also we had the Irish national anthem and Ireland's Call, you know, and it was that, again, that sort of convergence of the politics with the sport. The fact that Ireland's Call even exists is a political statement, if you like. And I remember just being really emotional as God Save the Queen was playing, because having that English presence, that British presence in Croke Park again, when the last time that happened was tragic, was really poignant. And somebody I was working with asked me, you know, why it mattered so much, and I was trying to explain, and I said, you know, I shouldn't really care, but I do. I want Ireland to win. You know, I want this to be respectful, but I really want Ireland to beat England today. And a cameraman that I was working with at the time said, we're gonna annihilate you. And I said, well, I hope you don't, you know, I hope it's a good fight anyway. He said, I don't, and he was being quite dismissive of the history of it. And then he said, and I said, well, you know, it means a lot to us. This day means a lot to us as a nation. And he said, I can't remember exactly what the build-up was, but he said, well, if I'm being honest, I should have told you what I really think. And that is that I would love England to go in and do exactly what they did in Croke Park the last time they were there. And it was, it was so shocking. I went off and I cried in this street in London, and somebody had to come and find out what was going on. And I mean, that's an exceptional what's the word even? What I'm trying to say is
Insensitivity.
that wasn't ever my normal experience
Yeah.
of people and, addressing the political history. But it was a reminder that still people didn't get it. But it was a reminder as well that on both sides there is still a level of extremism that does
Mm.
converge in sport sometimes. And it was a reminder not to be too naive, I guess, about it, because I was feeling very emotional about it and remembering some wounds can't really heal because people aren't ready to move on or to distance their lives from something that, this is an English cameraman who works and lives in London. It's got nothing to do with him. And yet he's willing to inflict that emotional pain just for the sake of it, just because you can. So it was a reminder that not all wounds can heal, I guess, through sport. But it was a beautiful, beautiful day. And as you say, Ireland did thrash England, which made it all the more lovely. However, that wouldn't have mattered if the anthems had been a disaster. The
Yeah.
thing that really mattered for the success of that day was that the anthems were played out respectfully, and they were. And yeah, I find it's one of the most significant sporting, political, historic moments that I have experienced in my lifetime. Anyway.
It really is, and as you were saying that, I was sort of taken aback by some, because often I see sort of like I see unkindness in this. It's more than unkindness, but like from a place of ignorance, but like that sort of deliberate provocative was is quite shocking. It made me wonder, and perhaps I don't want to pick at this because I do wonder whether we would get the same level of respect and tolerance if this was happening now, 15, 16, 17 years on. I wonder whether the state of sort of online discourse and things like that and sort of retreat to extremes would make that sort of day play out any differently. And perhaps we're
I
sort
mean,
of, I don't know.
I would like to think not in the way that I think sometimes we shine such a magnifying glass on social media and online discourse, and rightly so, because it can be a reflection and also a shaper of what our wider discourse actually is. But I do have more faith in humanity than that, and I do have more faith in the power of sport than that, and I
Mm,
believe that most people who are making the journey to a stadium and buying a ticket and planning their entire weekend around it and their family day around it are doing it for other reasons. And you're not doing it because you've been inflamed by something you've read on the extreme right or the extreme left or whatever on social media. I think that actually real life community is such a powerful antidote to
mm,
online rage, because when we all get together we realize how much we all have in common, how much we actually just want to celebrate being alive. And I think that the problem with the online world is that it speaks to the loneliest parts of ourselves and the darkest parts of ourselves that we feel has a place until you shine that light of real life onto it. Because most people aren't like that in real life. Most people aren't. And even if they retreat into that online, when you expose daylight on it, most people are actually bring out their more decent side, and also decency attracts decency. So, we are herd pack animals, really, aren't we? And we sort of follow that herd. And if everyone else in the stadium or most people are being respectful, generally, I think that would be the prevailing mood. So I think I like to think that even if it happened today, that it would be the same, because a communion of people in real life is very different to raging voices on the internet, I think, and I hope.
I hope so too, and that reminded me of the one game that I've attended at Croke Park, which was
Oh, tell
rugby.
me.
Rugby. Oh, it was the Ireland South Africa game when Johnny Sexton got like his first big start over O'Gara,
Uh,
and the fog came in at the end, and the very end. I think I was on Hill 16. I think I was,
oh yeah,
and
the dub
we were
end, that's what we call it.
Devon,
No,
and
the dubs all go.
the 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 final play was happening at the other end of the stadium, but we couldn't see because the fog had come down. We couldn't see, and Ireland were playing in white shirts as well, and this fog was very grey because it was South Africa, and South Africa in their green, and everybody had to turn and watch what they paid the ticket. We're trying to South Africa. I think Ireland were hanging on, and South Africa were trying to score to win. And this whole stand, we had to turn and watch the screen rather than the game because we had no idea what was happening because we couldn't see because of the fog. But that,
Brilliant.
but it was such a great day, and it's also because we've talked a little bit on this podcast before. We've done another episode on the RDS, which is a very different part of Dublin.
Mm,
That south side Ballsbridge sort of
yeah.
in we're on the north side of Dublin here. We're in sort of James Joyce territory in terms of could you just speak to that for a little bit and just in terms of like the setting of which Croke Park is in because I
Do
think
you know what, James? I would love to, but I never look around me when I'm going to Croke Park, and I would have to then have a little dig. The thing is, when you're going to Croke Park, you are just in a sea of hats, flags, and headbands. You know, that's what's being sold along the street, and you've got these street hawkers selling hats, flags, and headbands in the colours of the teams, and you're in a sea of people. And if you're stopping in a pub, certainly when I was little, it was to go to the toilet and grab maybe a Coke, probably not even, and keep along your way. I was never looking around me to the context of where the stadium was. And I can't even think. I would have to have a little proper look because there's like a set route that you take and then you go into the stadium and that's it. But as you say, it is a different, and even as you mention and reference the RDS and Ballsbridge and Croke Park being Croke Park is real Dublin to me. You know, this is where the tourists probably don't go so much. I don't know. Again, unless if they're dressed in hats, flags, and headbands, they would blend in, so you wouldn't know. Um, but this is authentic. This is proper gritty, real Irish, you know? It's not the sophisticated, gentrified, polished Dublin that I think a lot of tourists would see now and a lot of, successful Dubliners would I'm not saying that they wouldn't be going to Crook Park, obviously, but I mean they wouldn't necessarily be living around there. Um, and so for me, it's a very, very real representation of the earthiness of Ireland and the earthiness of Dublin, and that's the part that I always knew growing up. Growing up.
yeah, I think it definitely feels a little bit more real. Definitely feels it's got that little bit of grit which makes life interesting. There's
Mm.
almost the grit in the oyster, and I like that. So one of the things that I was struck by when you were talking about songs and the importance of songs and anthems and whatnot is how fraught that history of song with Irish rugby is. And if you go back to the 1987 Rugby World Cup, which I wrote a book on, partly on that, but Ireland used the Rose of Tralee as their national anthem because they couldn't agree. The Ulster players didn't want to sing the Soldier Song. The Munster, Connacht, and Leinster players obviously didn't want to sing God Save the Queen. And there was this idea that the Rose of Tralee would be a suitable replacement. And so I think this is part of the thing that sparks the um, the the need to compose Ireland's Call and come up with something. But I was sort of struck that it's almost come sort of full circle, this idea of sort of nationalism in song and in Irish rugby, because very much the song of the 2023 Rugby World Cup was
Mm.
Zombie by the
Yeah,
Cranberries.
yeah.
And there were some parts of the fan base there who I think obviously the overwhelming number of people enjoyed it and got into that, and that became the team selected that as their song. It wasn't imposed upon them. But I just thought that was an interesting moment where we've come full circle, and there's an Irish song talking about that. I mean, a horrible incident in Warrington, I think it was,
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
and it's just the importance of song, maybe to national identity, but particularly to Irish identity. I don't think
Mm.
can be undersold, can it?
It really, really can't. And I think, as with a lot of countries that have suffered a lot through either misfortune or plague or a foreign power, it does breed a lot of sort of melancholy, but also beauty. And so it can create the most beautiful literature and the most beautiful songs, and that's Ireland is well known for that. You know, we've several Nobel Prize winners for literature. And so I'm getting my head's going in a tangent because my dad actually went to a school that has did it have two Nobel Prize winners, which is the most of any school in history. But anyway, but yeah, songs are really, really important to Irish national identity, really important. And you mentioned Zombie, but the Fields of Athenry, for me, is always a rugby song. And as soon as that starts up, it's like this wall of support. You become that extra man in the stadium helping the team along the way. And again, the Fields of Athenry is based in our sad past, and it's all about stealing corn from the absentee English landlords so that the family can eat, but they're caught stealing corn from their own land, and so they're sent off to Australia. But it's funny just when you mention the Rose of Tralee, because I'd actually forgotten this, James, or did I forget it or not know? I'm not sure if I knew that was actually temporarily the national anthem. And it makes me smile because the Rose of Tralee, for me and for most Irish people, will be very strongly associated with the competition, the Rose of Tralee. I don't know if you know of this competition, but it's basically Father Ted did a bit of a riff on the competition, and they called it the Lovely Girl competition, I think they called it. And it is essentially a lovely girl competition. So it's so Irish. I love it. So other countries will have beauty pageants, but in Ireland we have the Rose of Tralee, and it's not even like a subtle surreptitious beauty pageant. It's got nothing to do with how you look. It's basically a competition between women who've got any connection with Ireland. So we'll have, the Derry Rose, we'll have the Cork Rose, but you'll also have the Manchester Rose, the Sydney Rose, the Brisbane Rose, and you're selected. It's the whole competition where you go along and you're selected based on your personality. So you have to just be really nice and interesting and charismatic, and you'll have a special talent that you do as well. So some people will do like an Irish dancing, like they'll do a jig or something, or they'll recite a poem that they've made up. Or I ended up watching this with my kids this year, and one lady's talent was reading tea leaves, which she was doing on national TV, and I thought this really doesn't translate at all. So it's basically a week-long competition in Tralee where the roses will go around and do different things with each other, and they're judged as they go on who is the nicest, and then the nicest rose will win. And I think my mother was always very disappointed that neither me nor my sister ever entered the Rose of Tralee, and our time is long gone. But I find it really funny that this song that is associated with this, gentle femininity became briefly an anthem for men, essentially going into this big physical battle and putting everything, their bodies on the line to smash into each other. It's sort of the antithesis of what many of us consider to be what the Rose of Tralee actually stands for. But yeah, music, really, really important. And again, it's typified by the fact that we do have two anthems when it comes to the Irish team. And it's really interesting.
Before we go, and I do want to be really respectful of your time. I could talk to you for ages about it. I feel it would be absolutely remiss not to tap into your experience of the past summer of the Paris Olympics, because I feel like the French did an amazing job hosting. And particularly with some of their choices of venues. So I don't know if you have any sort of favourite memories from Paris, and particularly with, in our context, in some sort of the venues that were used, and what you thought worked well from that Olympics.
Oh yeah, I do. And by the way, just briefly, when the French came to my mind whenever you were talking about whether or not there would be the same respect for the anthems right now, and it's very different. But one of my favourite sporting moments of this year actually was New Zealand playing at in Paris for the Autumn Nations series just passed, because we'd had the whole fuss around the haka, and we'd had, our England going to retaliate against the haka because Joe Marler had said it should be done away with and blah, blah, blah. And the French did such an incredible job at the Stade de France of honouring the haka with the dropping of the lights and the drama of the show. I mean, it was just goosebumps, amazing. And I also felt like that was a hangover of their beautiful production from the Paris Games. I would say Stade de France, I didn't get to go there, but what they did there with the rugby sevens, it was amazing. I could almost feel the city jumping every time France was playing there. In terms of my own personal experience, the two venues that I loved the most, one was the Urban Park, which they had down at the Place de la Concorde, wasn't it? Place de la Concorde, which is in this beautiful corner of Paris, just at the very end of the Champs-Élysées. And it's really funny for me going to Paris because for many people it's the city of romance and culture and literature, and for me it's sport because I'm always there for the Tour de France. And so where this Urban Park was the final bend of the final stage of the Tour de France. So this is when the sprint is just about to kick in, and I used to always stand on that corner and watch the laps, the final of the Tour de France. So to see that completely refashioned into this urban park was really beautiful because they've taken what is an architecturally and historically stunning corner of the city and made it gritty and urban and cool and young and fresh. And you had 3-on-3 basketball, and you had the skateboarding, and you had BMX. It was just super cool. And I loved the music that was playing there. I loved the vibe. I remember going down one day just to hang around, and there were this troupe of break dancers who were performing for the crowd. And I just love being able to look up to this, beautiful Haussmann architecture and see that mixture of the two. But really the venue for me that just grabbed at my soul was the beach volleyball at the Eiffel Tower. And I walked up. It was it was a pain in the backside to try to find, right? Because the Eiffel Tower is really obvious, but it's massive. And I couldn't work out where the blinking beach volleyball was around the Eiffel Tower. Anyway, it turns out it was a little bit of a distance away, but I had this whole trek to get there. And then I got into the venue, and you can't really see anything because they've obviously put the stands up, right? So you come in at the back of the stands, and that's sort of blocking any view. And so you've got to walk up these steps to get to the top of the stands to then find your seat. And as you're walking up, the Eiffel Tower is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the noise is starting to grow, and you're taking it step by step by step. And the whole experience is building as you're getting closer to the venue itself. And then eventually you come out to the top of the stands, and you can see the whole arena beneath you. You can see the sand and the players and the four sides of the temporary court with all the fans going crazy. And they did such a brilliant job of creating atmosphere. And you've got this just beautiful, iconic structure of the Eiffel Tower right in front of you. And the whole time I was there for the session, I got to watch randomly. I just decided to turn up one afternoon. I was watching America against Morocco, and my husband's Moroccan, so I was one of the very few in the crowd that was cheering for Morocco. But when I walked in, I had tears in my eyes. I thought, this is just the most beautiful way to present sport and countries coming together and the Olympic Games. And it was really, really special. And I think what Paris did so incredibly well was weaving sport through the city. So I loved the London Games, for example. And what they actually ended up doing at Stratford was incredible, and creating this beautiful park, and it was a wonderful atmosphere out there. But it was out there, most of the Olympic Games were separate from the city. What Paris did incredibly well was making it very much a Parisian Olympic Games, and it was such a beautiful moment because of that. And for me, that's what symbolizes it. It's the Eiffel Tower, the beach volleyball, the sand, the sun, everyone going crazy with their flags and creating an atmosphere and just sort of taking over the city a little bit, but, with full respect to the beauty of it at the same time. It was wonderful.
It really was. I very much enjoyed being there for it. I was only there for 3 days. I watched the first day on the Saturday, and I got such strong FOMO. I was like, I'm missing out on this, and it's not going to be in Europe until 2036 at the earliest. And I was just like, I'm just going to look at flights. And as soon as I realised they're so ridiculously expensive, I won't go. And they weren't ridiculously expensive. And I don't know if it's the same sort of thing that happened in London, where people who lived in London got out,
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah, yeah, yeah. All the Nagys left the city. It's exactly
And
the same. It was brilliant.
I came for 3 days. I did see the rugby sevens, which was fantastic. I saw the
Oh,
women's finals, and that the only is the atmosphere just dropped when France lost a little bit, but
yeah.
it picked back up for the medal games. But they were really invested in that. And the other thing, which is sort of like your beach volleyball thing, I think Parc des Champs was such a lovely
Oh, yeah, it looked
idea,
amazing.
and it's sort of got the yin to the beach volleyball's yang on the other
Mm.
side of the Eiffel Tower, which was even did more difficult to get to because you had to come at it from the west side, and it's on the west, so you had to go up and around the Trocadero and back down. But you were rewarded with the view because you'd come down and you were looking down on the Eiffel Tower and down onto the beach volleyball, and that was a space where they got all the medalists from the previous day to come and celebrate with the
That was
crowd.
so cool.
It was such a good idea, such a simple idea, and it's just
Yeah.
and it was absolutely love. I'd let them have it every 4 years if it was up
Yeah,
to me.
same, same.
You know,
But especially as you say, all the naysayers left the city as well. And I have a long history with Paris, and quite checkered as anyone. If you keep visiting somewhere in different stages in your life, then it will mean different things at different stages. And I fell in love with it, and then I lived there for summer and didn't really like it so much, and I felt it was dirty for a long time and overrated. And I loved the Tour de France, but blah blah blah. This made me fall fully in love with Paris all over again. I was, part of the Paris fan club. Sign me up. It was amazing, and partly, I guess, like you say with London, all the people who didn't want to be there weren't there, so it was left to the rest of us who wanted to celebrate sport and celebrate the city and bring something new to it. So it was incredible, incredible.
it really really was. I feel like I could we could go off and talk about the Tour de France. We could go off and talk about many many things.
Well,
Perhaps
yeah, a
there'll
sport without an arena, which is also the beauty of it, but maybe that's for another podcast.
Yeah, but perhaps there'll be a second appearance sometime in the future. But Orla, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your ground jewel with us. And I think we can all agree a truly, well, a magnificent stadium and a really important stadium.
Lovely. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my rambling memories, James. It's been lovely.
Thank you, Orla. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. Incredibly important discussion to have. Incredibly brilliant stadium, and with all that history, and obviously I mentioned my experience of going there in it during that chat we had, and I just think, yeah, although that cameraman, what a dickhead. I don't think he would have stayed with us through the intro, because I'm sure he'd be one of the people who I encourage to switch off. But yeah, so that's him. Just yeah, I couldn't believe it when she told me that story, and I was just like, wow. I mean, that's not that long ago as well. We're talking 15 years ago, something like that. Yeah. Anyway, this section of the show, I normally give a recommendation in terms of where else you can kind of go to. And so this week, I'm going to recommend every female guest that we've ever had on the Ground Jewels, because they're all brilliant in their own ways, and we wouldn't be inviting people onto this show if they weren't true, passionate sports fans. So, episode 1 in the archive, Ruth Madeley, the actor, she talks about Bolton Wanderers' Tough Sheet Community Stadium. Brilliant episode. Ruth Madeley's recommended. Ailey Doyle, Scottish, British, Olympic athlete, talking about Tynecastle, home of Heart of Midlothian. And that's episode 5. That's a recommended episode. Who else have we got? We have Zoe de Toledo, who is a rowing cox. Talked to us about the university boat race course. Honestly, one of the probably the cleverest people we've ever had on this show. Just so articulate, so knowledgeable about that section of the River Thames. That's a brilliant episode. We have Megan Scully, and we sort of referenced Megan's episode a little bit in the chat with Orla. She talked about the RDS Showgrounds, which is also in Dublin, home of the Royal Dublin Society. We talked about that. That's a brilliant episode. Jen Offord, the journalist. We talk about the Valley and Charlton Athletic. People love that episode. That's a really good episode. So go and look in our archive. Kate Mason, of course, Kate Mason, Wimbledon Centre Court, where she came straight from the Sports Journalism Awards. Heroic podcasting under pressure. Great stories. Pete Sampras story. I think there's a great Venus Williams story in there as well. That's a brilliant episode. Go into our archive, find any of these brilliant women, listen to their fantastic episodes, and I know the people who are here now aren't the dicks, but if you see your mates being dicks, call them out for being dicks, because we don't need more fucking dicks in the world. Okay? Anyway, I'll see you next time.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.